Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace, unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. People think they fail goals for a number of reasons. Maybe it's their lack of motivation, the lack of time and resources, and maybe it's even the fact that they lack discipline. Maybe they're not consistent enough within their habits, and maybe they don't have necessarily those habits in the past that are able to help them, and so they have to build them up. But from my understanding, not just as someone who has goals themselves and has seen themselves fail, but also just from researching more into this, the problem doesn't even just start necessarily when you start putting in effort. It can start even before that. And so I've mentioned this topic on goal setting in the past in my episode on learning to count the small wins, and learning to be more grateful and appreciative. The thing is, though, when it came to actually looking at the goals that we have set and being able to see the small building blocks, sometimes it's really hard to be grateful and to even achieve those goals because we set unmanageable ones. We set unobtainable ones. And in that sense, because we're already setting ourselves up in a way that we are going to fail, or quote unquote fail, maybe not necessarily hit our target or hit the set expectation that we have for ourselves, we do set ourselves up for disappointment. And I know this because my goal, for instance, with this podcast, initially in September, I had said to myself, I want to publish this podcast in January 2026. Now, clearly that did not happen. And there's a reason for that, because I didn't even set up the goal properly, let alone, maybe not have the capacity. But it really did start with the fact that I didn't set myself up in the way that I was going to be able to succeed, in a way that I was able to clearly see my vision, see the goal that I had, and in a way where I was able to understand what strategy I needed to take on in order to actually fulfill it. And so that's why today I want to talk about learning how to properly set goals. And most of this is coming from the goal setting theory by Edwin Locke. So let's get into what goals are actually. And a goal is basically a desired future state. It's something that you want. It's something, maybe it's a vision, maybe it's like a state of mind, maybe it's something materialistic. It's just something that you would like to have in the future. And when it comes to actually setting the goal, that's deciding where you want to go. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's about what you do in order to get there. So this isn't talking about how to necessarily build up the discipline, how to be really consistent and persistent in that sense. But we're really here to talk about how can we set up very clear and clarified goals so that when we are working towards them, we understand this is what I'm going for, and this is maybe a bit more explicit and specific so that we actually have a clear direction. So it's not really about the processes and the activities, but really on just the baseline of setting it up. And I believe many of us, myself included, we mess this up because we romanticize what that goal is going to look like, what it's going to look like in the future. So for me, for instance, when it comes to setting up this goal for the podcast, let me tell you right now, when I was in September and creating that goal, like literally just the goal that, publish a podcast in 2026, January, I remember I was really just thinking about what it's going to look like. I was like the edits, the reels that are going to come from this, maybe the impact that it's going to have. But I wasn't thinking about actually setting up the goal in a way where when I'm looking at that goal, I'm also able to start thinking about the process, because the goal that I had set up was very vague initially. And so I had to, when I realized I wasn't really, getting anywhere with my goal, and that wasn't necessarily for, again, my lack of discipline or the lack of motivation, but for me personally, it really was about the fact that I had external constraints and prior obligations. But when I really came back to the drawing board on it, I looked at the goal, said really all that said there was that I wanted to launch the podcast. And so I had to dig a bit deeper and try to revise it because I did want a clear vision. I did want to understand consistently, what I was working towards and how I was going to be doing that. Like maybe even if the goal just had like a few key details, at least I understand where I can draw from aspirations, like in order to create my strategy. And so when I revised the goal, I said that I want to launch the second season of the Uncomfortable podcast by January 2026. Well, not January 2026 anymore, but by March 2026, by consistently editing throughout the week and having at least 10 edited episodes to share by the end of February. And so the difference within that goal statement, within setting that goal, it's not just in the word count. Obviously it's a bit longer, more drawn out, maybe a run-on sentence, but that's not what it's about. It's the fact that there's an increased specificity within, and that's going to help to increase my attention. Now I understand different aspects that I need to be taken into consideration. So like editing needs to be something that I'm doing weekly. Having another small mini goal in there with like 10 edited episodes, that helps me to break down what the goal is actually going to be, and how I'm going to actually achieve it. It helps to increase my efforts because, again, I have these smaller building blocks. It's able to be more digestible, let's say, so that I can actually ease myself into creating the habits and creating the processes that I need in order to actually reach the end goal. And it will help to increase my persistence, and also my ability to create different strategies. Again, because I have these like mini goals within, like I understand now, okay, how can I make this, break it down even smaller? What needs to be happening? Okay, what kind of systems can I be putting in place? And so that, because I've set this goal up now in a more of a vivid manner and in a manner where I can clearly see also like different actions that need to be happening, I'm able to actually create strategies for myself, and systems that help me to put it in place and put it into practice. And so now, like looking back, I do realize that this goal was much more specific. This goal didn't allow me to remain confused about how I was going to actually get to the end result. And that's something I want you guys to ask yourselves. Like, when you're creating your goals, do you still feel some type of confusion? And I'm not saying that the goal necessarily has to have every single little step, but in the initial sense, do you understand what the vision is? And can you clarify it? Or is there anything that is leaving you confused? Maybe you're still struggling to understand what it is exactly that you want. And so in order to clarify our goals, there's this really great tool. It's the SMART tool. I think many people have heard about it. So understanding the specific aspect, the measurable aspect, the attainable/achievable aspect, the relevant and the time-bound aspect of your goal. When I am setting now my goals, what I do, because I have this understanding that I need to be specific, that I do need to include more aspects, I like to go back and check with the SMART tool and ask myself, okay, is this time bound? Okay, do I see the specificity within? Okay, am I seeing that it's going to be attainable? And I like to check in with myself on this because then I can actually understand whether or not my vision is clear for myself. And then I can go from there, start to create the strategies, and I won't even lie to you, just knowing that I have that written out. And I mean, I like to really do write my goals out, but just having that really clearly stated does help when it comes to how much effort I'm going to be putting in. And it does keep me motivated in some sense to just continue. And yes, maybe now we understand that this is actually how we properly set up our goals, and that this will continue to help and not improve, but will help us as we actually go for them and strategize for them. But naturally, of course, other factors can still influence our success. And so one of those factors is like commitment, for example. Asking yourself, how important is this goal for me? Where does this fall within my priorities? Does it maybe pertain to one of my core values, for instance? And so for looking at the podcast, goal. This does pertain to one of my core values, to create, to be myself, to be authentic, and so I really do want to express that. And so that's why this is an important goal for me, and that's why I'm really committed to the goal. You also have to ask yourself, do you believe that you actually are capable of it? Because if you already have also those limiting beliefs, that's something also to look into and to understand a bit more for yourself, so that you also know where maybe you need to reassure yourself, maybe you need to dig a bit deeper, set up a better process, a different strategy, in order to make sure that you're actually able to commit to the goal and feel like you can fulfill the goal itself because you have what it takes. And again, does this align with your self-belief, your values? Yes. Do you believe that you, again, have the capacity for this and are able to commit to this? And so, as I mentioned, creating this, learning to create and wanting to create is really what makes me committed to my goal. So when you are designing your own goals, also follow up with asking yourself and reminding yourself, what is it that makes me want to commit to this goal? And naturally, I feel like that's different when it's a goal that you personally have versus something, or how if a goal is actually just placed on you that you have to fulfill. Naturally, there are different forces, but if it is something that is personal, and especially if you do have a busy life where maybe you're in school, maybe you're working, maybe you have family obligations, maybe this is just something to consider, to remind yourself that it is still of importance and that there is still so much value in it, so that you don't, and I don't want to say this, but don't end up making quote unquote excuses for the fact that you're not able to. And it's just a nice reminder to have for why it's important, even if it feels that sometimes the goal isn't worth it. And I've definitely felt that with this podcast, that sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? But just remind yourself, where does this fall in line maybe with your values? And obviously, as you're going through the strategy and you're actually progressing within your goal or working towards it, you do need to sometimes readjust what the goal is. You do need to adjust your strategy. Maybe you need to adjust the time. I'm hoping right now, as I'm talking to you guys, I said that I'm posting this in March 2026, and I really do hope that I'm going to be, but at the same time, there's a lot of time in between, and I understand that I might have to adjust, and I'm not going to put that on myself and say that that's that means I failed. No, it just means I had to adjust. And the reason we need to adjust is because we get feedback, as you're progressing and as you're actually doing the work, you start to get feedback from the actual results that you're producing. You can also be getting feedback from different persons. So sometimes perfect example, the other day, I asked one of my roommates, hey, can you guys listen to this real quick? Because I want to know how the audio sounds for you. And so in that sense, I was able to get feedback from them, whether or not someone would actually listen to the podcast just based off the audio. And so had it been negative, then I would have changed it, and that would have made me adjust a bit. It could have set me back, but in the end, it's all towards my goal. And it's really important that as you're going throughout your process, that you're reflecting also, and having some check-ins and checkpoints where okay, what is what I have right now telling me? Do I need to adjust? Do I need to redirect? Is there somewhere I need to be placing more of a focus on? And it's a really great way for you to keep yourself in check. It's a really great way also to understand that, when you're going towards a goal, it's not just going to be a direct line. It is not just going to be 100% great. And there will be ups and downs with it and quote unquote setbacks. But the setbacks, if they're giving you feedback and if they're helping to improve your process and helping to improve the end result, it's not a setback. It is just data that's providing you with more feedback. And you can't see that necessarily as a criticism on yourself for the reason why you're not able to attain the goal. Just see it as a way of, this is going to be helping me to improve, And when you can flip your mindset or see that in a positive sense, then you're also able to obtain so much more from checking in with yourself and checking in with that goal necessarily. And I think that will definitely show when it comes down to looking at the end results and, looking at what you really want to achieve. And maybe it even surpasses the initial vision that you had for that goal. And so I think that's just really important to do, asking yourself for feedback, giving yourself feedback, doing progress checks, and learning to adjust the goal, knowing that it's not necessarily a failure on your account. It's just happens. It just happens, and as I've said this so many times, but like life does get busy. And sometimes you need to prioritize other aspects as well and not be so harsh on the fact that maybe, again, you didn't necessarily achieve the set expectation that you had from yourself at the beginning. And that's very okay. But moving on, because I think I maybe just got a bit preachy, it's also really important that you do not compare. I believe that for almost everything that you're trying to do, whether it has to do with goals, whether it has to do, with mindset, any aspect of your life, do not compare it. You could be having a similar goal to someone else and you could be seeing that like they are doing better than you. And that can suck. That could suck. It could also be something that you internalize and you start to think, oh my gosh, I really am a failure. We started doing the goal or started creating that goal at the same time. How is it that they're so far ahead of me in comparison? The thing is, there are a lot of external circumstances which influence our capacities. Some people have prior obligations. We might have prior obligations, which might mean that our time is limited. Maybe health issues come up, maybe finances, maybe relationships impact whether or not we're even able to move forward, or maybe that impacts our mental health at that point. And sometimes it's also, whether or not we have community around us, if they're able to support us, if they're supporting the other person, and we might not be having at that time like a good community around us, that's also influencing like how we're able to move through and if we have that kind of support. And sometimes it's also not just about external circumstances, but internally we are also all different. We've all have had different upbringings, and even if we do have similar upbringings, we all interpret that differently. We've all come out as different people. And so some of us might be able to, for instance, regulate our emotions better. And so when it's coming to creating these goals and actually achieving these goals that require us also to have like an emotional investment, if we're people who have not been tested in the past with emotional regulation, then that's something that we also need to learn. And so if we were to compare ourselves to someone who has consistently been able to self-regulate and has learned different coping mechanisms for this, we're not giving ourselves it's not a fair playing field, because you're comparing things that you don't even see and that you don't even understand that this person has been able to deal with in the past. And you're looking at yourself and you're diminishing yourself, but there's no reason to. We're all just at different places in our life, and we all do have different capabilities and different capacities. And there might be even things that you're able to do, or you might internally have worked on more in comparison to other people, that gives you a quote unquote advantage in that sense. But at the end of the day, it's just really important that, you do not compare how you're achieving these goals, in what time frame it's happening. Understand that you have different tools to work with, whether that be physical and tangible ones, but also the internal ones. They're very different, and you can't necessarily see what's going on within a person's mind or how they're able to create different systems. Or then also, even when it comes to building that discipline to actually achieve that goal, it's all really different from person to person. But it is really important at the end of the day that you're still seeing your goal, you're seeing your clear vision, you're able to understand, what specifically has to happen, and you're able to adjust given that, you'll be getting feedback from yourself, you'll be getting, maybe if you're open to it, feedback from other persons as well. And in that sense, keep your head there, don't focus too much on what's going on around in the sense of comparison, and understand that there's going to be an end product. There's going to be an end product, and starting with setting the goal properly will help you to actually get there. And you don't, like, as I've been saying, you don't really need to focus on the fact that you necessarily don't have everything figured out in comparison to other people. This is a process, and actually learning how to achieve your goal takes time, takes understanding of yourself especially. And what was actually just recently recommended to me is being able to clarify my strengths and being able to clarify my values, so that as I'm actually going through setting up my goals, I'm also able to understand and pinpoint how my goal impacts this value or how it's related. I'm also able to understand, the strengths that I have right now, how can I work with them so that I can achieve this goal. So when you also set this goal up, maybe take the time to look at your strengths, really analyze them and how can I move with them. And then also looking at your values again, so you can tie it to the goal. And in that sense, you might have a great starting point for actually achieving those goals. And I know for me right now, as I'm filming this, it's no longer the start of January, but everyone gets into those resolution habits and the goals that they have for the future. And I know that, like, for me personally, what works is I have a notebook where I'm writing down these goals, physically writing them down. I also have them in my Asana checklist, in my Notion, and I'm being really clearly explicit with them. And I'm regularly reminding myself of it. And in terms of like the feedback, the checkpoints, I'm also making sure that I'm implementing checkpoints so that I can go back and revisit. And even if that means I have to rewrite it, at least I have a starting point. At least I understand where I can start off with my process so that I can actually achieve my goals and be happy with the progress that I'm making. And naturally, of course, as you're going through those checkpoints, remember to be appreciative of the fact that you maybe have gotten to that point, and be appreciative of the journey. This is coming back all from episode 1 of this season, just remembering to be grateful. And with all that said, though, coming back to setting the goal and setting it properly, the question I want you guys to ask yourselves today, especially if you have the time, maybe you have a notebook in front of you, maybe you just take out your phone real quick, even if you're listening via phone, and write down what a goal is that you need to re-clarify. And ask yourself how you're going to do that. Maybe take 5 minutes after this episode and ask yourself, recheck maybe with the SMART tool. Is it clarified for me, or am I still a bit confused? But do ask yourself, what's a goal that you need to re-clarify? See how you're going to be prioritizing it. How does it attach to your values? What strengths can you use maybe to help it progress it? And be kind to yourself with it. When you have these big goals and small goals, you're doing something new for the first time. Be kind to yourself. Set them up properly, and hopefully that will help. Guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to tune in every Monday for a new episode on Spotify and YouTube. And go ahead and check our Instagram and TikTok for more content. Bye!